Hi, I'm Dan Kubisky with the Society of Professional Journalists International Community. For the past couple of years, Hong Kong has been operating under a national security law imposed on it by Beijing. The law allows local authorities to arrest any individuals or close any organization that questions the rule of the Communist Party. Under the law, Apple Daily, an independent newspaper, was closed. The owner of Apple Daily has been under arrest for his criticism of the Chinese Communist Party since April of 21. In the past couple of weeks, demonstrations have broken out in China related to the COVID-19 lockdown procedures there. The symbol of the demonstrations has been a blank sheet of paper. Just yesterday, the Hong Kong security chief, Chris Tang, warned Hong Kong residents that any displays of support for the demonstrators in China could lead to arrests. Now, how all this gets reported, how things have changed in the once vibrant free press community in Hong Kong, we have our go-to guy in Hong Kong, Eric Wishart. Eric is the Standards and Practices Editor for AFP and has written the guidelines for journalists operating in dangerous situations. Eric, welcome back to the International Community Talks.
Good morning from a kind of chilly Hong Kong. It's about 16 degrees here. That's cold for us. 16 centigrade, that is.
Well, that's easy to convert because that's 61 degrees for us Americans. So, Eric, I guess the first question I'd like to ask is, 10 months ago we talked. How, just in a brief summary, how have things changed, if they have, in those past 10 months?
I think it's been more of the same. I mean, I think one thing that's quite striking is they're using the sedition law a lot. The slightest sign of protest is jumped on. There was a man, they played the Chinese national anthem at a shopping mall quite recently. A man waved the colonial British flag, got arrested. When they had the Queen's commemoration of the Queen outside the British consulate, a man played this national anthem. It's not the national anthem. The national anthem of Hong Kong is the Chinese national anthem, but he played this protest anthem, "Glory to Hong Kong," that was published during the protest. He played that outside the consulate, got arrested. There's been a huge fuss because there was a rugby match with the Hong Kong team in South Korea. And it just seems like an accident because if you Google Hong Kong national anthem, instead of getting the March of the Volunteers, you get this protest anthem, "Glory to Hong Kong." Anyway, the rugby team in South Korea, when they were introducing the Hong Kong team, they played this protest anthem instead of the Chinese anthem, which has created a huge fuss. I mean, this happens in Kuwait. They played the Borat theme instead of this Kazakh national anthem for the Kazakhstan team. But in Hong Kong, these things are not funny. And they've launched a criminal investigation into it and brought in members of the Hong Kong Rugby Union to find out what happened. So anything, the slightest piece of dissent or anything is jumped on. So, I mean, very unusually, I mean, we haven't seen any demonstrations like this, I would say, since the national security law this week, when there was a bit of solidarity shown with the protesters in the mainland, with the holding up these sort of white A4 pieces of paper. And then, of course, Chris Tang, who just jumps on everything, said that this could be the start of a colour revolution, drew comparisons to previous protests. So it's quite oppressive, the general atmosphere. I mean, anybody who wants to raise their head above the parapet risks arrest, basically.
Okay. Before we get to how the demonstrations are being reported or not reported, just want to go back just a little bit because this year was also the 25th anniversary of the handover of Hong Kong from the United Kingdom to China. There was some controversy over press access to the ceremonies and to the events. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, they opened the press accreditation for Xi Jinping's visit, and a lot of people rejected, um, um, including foreign journalists on security grounds. But of course, as usual, they don't say why, right? And even organizations like my own, who initially got granted X number of accreditations, had that number slashed. So the Hong Kong Journalists Association protested about this because they really, really restricted the press coverage of Xi Jinping's visit. So, which you compare that with a handover 25 years ago. I mean, there was hundreds of foreign journalists came to Hong Kong to cover the handover. So, I mean, that alone just shows the difference. And again, I mean, when Prince Charles and Tony Blair came for the handover and Chris Patten was still here, they were very visible, of course. It was a public ceremony, but it was, I mean, no members of the public saw Xi Jinping. I mean, he came and he left. He didn't actually spend the night in Hong Kong. He left. He went back to the mainland to spend the one night. But I mean, it just shows how the city's changed. I mean, it was a very, very closed event and with very limited press access.
Okay, and so now let's talk about the demonstrations that are going on in China right now. Everything from the Foxconn demonstrations to the multiple demonstrations around China. How are Hong Kong media handling these demonstrations?
Well, I see you're wearing a Hong Kong Free Press T-shirt. So the Hong Kong Free Press, led by the Tom Grundy and his team, have been following it closely. Obviously, the international media here have been following it on both sides of the border. Looking at the local coverage, I would say, I'm just plugging in my charger. Looking at the local coverage, I would say that in the Saicha Morning Post, which is the main English language newspaper, it's been patchy. They have covered it. Sometimes when it's been the world's news story, it's been in the below the fold in the Post, you know, both online and in the print edition. So it wasn't consistently their top story, which I thought it might have been. Sometimes they put local Hong Kong stories above it. I think quite striking has been RTHK, which is the public broadcaster, which is in theory a public broadcaster, in other words, publicly funded but editorially independent, not a state broadcaster, which is a propaganda outlet. I would invite you to try and find a story about the protests on RTHK's news website. I mean, they basically ignored it from what I can see. Looking at the coverage, I mean, it's just, as I say, I read somewhere that they have covered the protests, but I was looking again at the site this morning. They basically ignored the protests in the mainland. And I've not seen much in RTHK either about the small protests in Hong Kong. So RTHK, I mean, it's been very much turned into a very much government-controlled media outlet reflecting the position of the government, I would say. You know, and this has been quite a concern in Hong Kong because it was always quite independent. You know, so and of course, all the local. There's been a lot on the local. In Twitter, there's been a lot shared on Twitter locally in Chinese and in English about what's going on both in Hong Kong and in the mainland. It's still quite free that actually here, you know, but I mean the government does say it monitors what people are posting in social media, so you've got to be careful.
Yeah, I noticed you had mentioned earlier that they take the government, the Hong Kong government, is using this national security law almost with abandon. They're using it a lot, or threatening to use it a lot, and that seems.
And also
yeah,
and also the sedition law, the colonial era sedition law. That's the one. I mean, the sentence actually, it's not as draconian as it sounds. I mean, it's more than you would want it to be. But I mean, I think sedition, I think the maximum sentence is 2 years, actually. It's a colonial era law, but they use that a lot. And they can, I mean, anybody like, as I said, the person waving the flag during the national anthem, playing the Glory to Hong Kong and a harmonica, a commemoration for the Queen. That tends to fall. They tend to use the sedition law for that kind of thing. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, wow. And how is this playing out with the foreign correspondents who are based in Hong Kong? I mean, we have the Foreign Correspondents Club, the infamous Foreign Correspondents Club. You have a lot of international news organizations with bureaus there. How are they dealing with all of this?
I mean, the international, again, I mean, AFP and the other news organizations, I'm not aware of any, there's no political pressure from the government on them. I mean, they're covering it as a news story. The real pressure is on the local media for sure, you know. And one thing that's been interesting, I mean, I don't know if my colleagues in the SPJ are aware of the Foreign Correspondents Club, but I mean, this was the bastion of free speech and defender of press freedom in Hong Kong, and by extension, obviously, China. You know, there's the Foreign Correspondents Club of China, of course, in Beijing. And it's almost a relic from the past because the government is its landlord, which was fine during the colonial era when we didn't have a national security law. But the problem with the Foreign Correspondents Club lease, 7-year lease, was due to end at the end of December. And so they've just found out yesterday that it's being renewed, but only for 3 years, not for 7 years. And there are clauses now in the lease that the club should respect the national security law and also defend the interests and concerns of the Hong Kong government. Of course, it goes without saying, of course, that the FCC will respect the laws of Hong Kong, but the fact that it has to be written into the lease, and also that in some ways it's supposed to defend the interests of the Hong Kong government, is obviously a source of concern. But this is despite the fact that the Foreign Correspondents Club has gone out of its way actually to please the Hong Kong government, and by extension the government in Beijing. Earlier this year, the FCC cancelled the Human Rights Press Awards. This was an award, I think it goes back, I think it was created by our old friend Francis Moriarty, actually, who started the Press Freedom Committee at the FCC.
Right.
These awards, originally they were to give awards to coverage of human rights issues in Asia, for example, thorough coverage of Rohingya refugees and boats in the sea, this kind of thing. But since 2014 and what we call the umbrella protest movement, it became more focused, I would say, on sort of pro-democracy movement in Hong Kong. And it has an independent panel of judges. And earlier this year, when the board of the FCC discovered that several of the awards were going to Stand News, which was a news outlet in Hong Kong that's been closed down and accused of sedition by the government. When the FCC discovered that the Stand News had won several awards, they cancelled the awards, okay. Right? Which created a huge fuss, right? Claiming that the club would face legal jeopardy if they went ahead with the awards. And there was a lot written about it at the time. We still don't know who these lawyers were. They were not named. It was verbal advice. There was nothing in writing. And it's very questionable whether or not the club would have faced any legal jeopardy. So that really discredited the club in many people's eyes in the journalist community in Hong Kong. And it's been quite quiet, to be honest, on the press freedom front of late. And so they've got this new lease. and we'll see. I mean, there's just this sort of Damocles now, because if they're seen to breach anything to do with national security, under the terms of the lease, it can be terminated immediately. So going forward, it's hard to see how they're going to be very outspoken, because, and we've talked about this before, Dan, I mean, it's just the red lines. Nobody knows. But the national security law is not like other laws we've seen, because you don't know the red line until you've crossed it. So what's the remedy for that? Self-censorship, isn't it? So that's where we are. So that was, and then today, Jimmy Lai. Do you want to talk about Jimmy Lai?
Sure, let's talk about Jimmy Lai, because I mean, this is a name that everybody, I think, knows, especially those of us in the journalism communities around the world.
Mm-hmm. I mean, Jimmy founded. I mean, he fled mainland China as a child and set up the Apple Daily, which was obviously staunchly opposed to the Chinese Communist Party, very critical of the Hong Kong government. And it was shut down post NSL a couple of years ago, and he's been basically in jail ever since. And he was supposed to be going on trial today. He's charged with, he's facing multiple charges. I mean, he's already been found guilty of other charges in Hong Kong related to other things. But today is, I think it was supposed to be the start of the big trial, colluding with external forces, etc., etc. And he wanted to have a British lawyer, and the Hong Kong government appealed against that. They lost 3 times in Hong Kong courts. So John Lee, who is the chief executive of Hong Kong, has now appealed to the National People's Congress, right, in the mainland, to rule on it. It's more to give an advice, but I mean, basically, the opinion of 3 courts in Hong Kong is no longer sufficient now for the Hong Kong government. So we don't know what's going to happen, but they've applied for an adjournment to the case. So it looks like it's probably going to, the start of the trial is going to be postponed. But it just shows again that the rule of law in Hong Kong, which was sacrosanct, nowadays, particularly when it concerns national security matters, it can still be overridden by the powers that be in Beijing.
And that seems to be the big issue, is that you mentioned already, there is no bright red line, but we are seeing an erosion of rule of law.
Which the government, of course, disagrees with. They say that there is rule of law in Hong Kong.
Right. Right.
And they say, I mean, I'm trying to remember the number. I mean, since 2020, I think what was the statistic that came out? Hold on, you can just give me a second. The Reporters Without Borders press freedom index. Yeah. I mean, Hong Kong
I think dropped to like 148 out of 180, something like that.
I think there were, I think there were some like 56, and now they're 148, or the other way around. I mean, they've just plummeted.
Right.
And the answer the government gives is that there is press freedom in Hong Kong. Journalists just have to respect the law, right? But I mean, the reality is that journalists are in jail, and a local reporter who went into the vehicle registration department and did a search for some number plates to find out some information about a case, got charged with illegally accessing information and fined, and then she appealed, and she just lost her appeal. So I think this is just what was quite acceptable normal investigative journalism in the past has become criminalized.
Right. I remember that case. I think we reported on it as well in our newsletter. Um,
Hmm.
okay. Eric, thank you very much for taking time off bright and early in the morning for you. We do always appreciate your insights and your reports coming out of Hong Kong. Thank you. Is there anything else you would like to actually add to end, or?
Not really. I mean, well, I would say on a positive note, I mean, there are still, I mean, and you'll have seen from the very unusual demonstrations in Hong Kong this week, and what is going on in mainland China is, I mean, people still resist, and it's interesting in Hong Kong. I mean, it doesn't take much. National security law or no national security law, the second a lot of people in Hong Kong have the chance to pop up with their white A4 sheets to protest, they will. So it's there. It's not gone away, this. It's still there in Hong Kong, and the government is very aware of it. That's why they jump in every single slight manifestation, because they know it's there. And but I also don't think that, I think journalists generally covering the situation in the mainland, I mean, let's not get too down that narrative. It's, there's, we'll have to see how this plays out. But I mean, people were, so is this the end of Xi Jinping and all this kind of stuff? I mean,
right.
let's not run before we can walk. I mean, he's just been elected to a new term, but it's quite interesting. There's a bit of easing, I think, on some of the restrictions. So I think that I get the sense they're listening as well. But no, I mean, there's still people working hard. There's still journalists. My journalism classes at 2 universities are still full. There's a lot of people coming into professional Hong Kong. So it's not all doom and gloom. I mean, journalists do work in hostile, difficult environments, and Hong Kong, unfortunately, has taken a step in that direction. But it doesn't mean that people are, as the Hong Kong Free Press is doing, are still reporting relatively freely and independently in Hong Kong.
Wow, great. Thank you very much. Again, thank you for taking time to chat with us. Take care. Have a good day.
Do my best. Thank you. Bye-bye.